Hello, everyone. I'm Kevin McCaffrey with Crosse Investments 37.4, a global placement agent, and Private Markets Insider, a platform for identifying investors, funds, and deals through relevant content and this community. I really thank you for joining us in the midst of all of this turmoil we have going on. I sincerely hope you and your family and your team are staying active and sane through all of this and staying safe. In fact, I hope you're doing a little bit better than that. I hope you're finding some silver linings in the considerable cloud cover we've had. Many people I talk to are embracing shifts in their priorities. When I look around, behaviors have changed more in the last couple of months than they have in the last couple of decades. Many of us are more conscious of our health and general wellness. I mean, doctors are using the phones and other tech to help patients. People are buying bikes by the bushel. And even bachelors here in New York City are actually cooking. I'm telling you, it's pandemonium out there. So there's a lot going on. There's an old quote actually from the economist John Maynard Keynes: when the facts change, I change my mind. Well, facts have certainly changed, and everyone loves a comeback story. I'm in New York City now in the phase 2 of our comeback. The United States of America is staging a comeback. Lance Armstrong will be on later. He's reinvented himself. And in the coming months, we'll help identify and facilitate a range of opportunities and discussions. So what's next? Well, these are interesting times. People use that word interesting when they're not sure if it's going to bite them in the butt. It's stressful for investors who need to be cautious without missing opportunities. Public markets mostly react to monetary policy and politics. Stock indexes don't appear to be tied to macroeconomic conditions or financial performance. And most investors feel like this is a time to be selective. So more people are turning to the private markets for better performance based on the scrutiny of insiders picking their spots. Recent research indicates that global asset owners have 15% or so of their assets in private markets. That's up from next to nothing 20 years ago. The mere fact that so many of you have tuned in today for yet another Zoom call tells me that we can all agree on the importance of coming together to share insights. These tricky times are precisely where we make our most fortuitous decisions, where progress is made on fixing problems, where returns are made to fund pension plans and families secure wealth for their future. I've heard time and again that the best tool is a valuable community of insiders that share valued investments in the private markets. So for the past decade, I've helped connect LPs and GPs, and moving forward, we'll be doing more of that while putting particular focus on individual deals and discussions. I'll follow up with some of you actually to contribute to the community with your input and expertise. And I welcome all of you to contact us and take on specific sectors and areas of interest. For today, we'll focus on healthcare, including general health and wellness, solutions for real human issues and solutions improving our lives. And with that, quick program note, the following presentation is for informational purposes only. None of the information shared for the opinions that are given here are to be construed as an offer to buy or sell a security. If you have any questions for the speakers during the program, please use the Q&A feature. We'll answer as many questions as we can during this webinar, and we will follow up afterward to answer any remaining questions and to have conversations where appropriate. So finally, we've pulled together some investors to discuss opportunities in healthcare today. starting with a panel discussion led by Melanie Strong, managing partner at Next Ventures. So Mel, I'd like to pass the torch here for the next 40 minutes or so, and then I'll check in with questions from the audience as we get close to the end of the panel. But first, would you give us an idea of your expertise, your role, and your general view on opportunities you're seeing at Next Ventures?
Yeah, for sure. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here. I'm calling you or Zooming you from Oregon. So I joined Next Ventures, which is a fairly new sports health and wellness VC fund a bit over a year ago. After a pretty awesome career at Nike, where I led various businesses globally as well as locally, worked in marketing for a handful of years. But in the last couple of years, I really saw an opportunity in this space where technology and innovation that may have started with a high-performing athlete was transcending into healthcare in a really interesting way. So I had done a few years of work with Nike's Accelerator and really felt like this was a great next chapter for me. So spent a few years working with various firms and decided that I really wanted to be at the front end of a brand new firm where we could learn a lot together, be really humble, which especially right now during COVID, I think is a really important trait for us. So I met my two partners, Lance Armstrong and Lionel Conacher, a few years ago. Lance, you'll get to meet a little bit later. Lionel is also on this call, and Lionel, I want to say Happy Canada Day. He's up in Toronto right now, has a wealth of private equity and investment banking background. And between the three of us, we've been having a great time on our fund. And Lance will talk a little bit more about that after this panel. But I'm happy to be here. I think I bring sort of, I guess what you would call operating experience to the team. So I've led teams, big and small, for the last 20 years, have worked in some growth areas for Nike, have also developed most of their digital products, including Nike Training Club, Nike Run Club, and the failed Nike Fuel Band, which I'm happy to talk about. So yeah, it's great to be here, and I'm really excited to introduce each of our panelists. So Kevin, if you're cool with that, I will step right in. Okay. I'm going to start with Jason. And so with each of our four panelists, they're going to introduce themselves to you guys and then talk a little bit about their kind of overall sense of where things are in the marketplace. So each of these folks has a wealth of experience in healthcare, health technology. So they're going to share a little bit of that insight as they introduce themselves. So Jason Mundt, I'd love to start with you.
Great. Thanks, Mel. So I'm Jason Mundt with Siguler Guff. Our team manages a fund focused on small and lower middle market buyouts. And we focus the investments on both investing in funds with about half of our capital, and the other half of our capital goes directly into companies. And so we're looking for good GPs as partners to work with. Our sector focus is pretty broad. There are certainly some areas we don't focus in, such as oil and gas, but primarily manufacturing, business services, and then healthcare is a large component of what we do. We've been investors in the behavioral health space for quite some time, in the oral care space, in veterinary clinics. We've done some work in clinical trials, and then also in some cancer diagnostics as well. So we're pretty broad there, less in the research and development side of things in terms of new products and new drugs, but we do like the healthcare space and think it's one that's growing and will continue to grow over time.
Awesome. Thanks, Jason. All right, Christian Bjelland, if you could introduce yourself and give us a little sense of how you feel about these post-COVID times.
Yeah, Chris, thank you very much, Mel. Christian Bjelland here, born and raised in Norway, came to US for college and spent some time in investment banking, still recovering from those horrible years, but a good learning. Went to business school where I caught the entrepreneurial bug. Spent a little bit of time in venture capital at a firm called Box Group, and then started a company called Hello Alfred with two classmates. Launched that, led growth there, and then had been spending a few years investing and supporting my family office in Norway, primarily focused on kind of early stage investments in the US, where over the last few years I've done several in the health and wellness space. And then more recently started a firm with a friend from college called Trident, where we invest in small cap private equity deals, with healthcare being one of our three sectors that we focus on. And so from both of those perspectives, I think we're in a very interesting and exciting time. You know, from the startup side of things, situations that we're living in right now create a need to kind of be exceptionally innovative and think outside the box, because we're being forced to reckon with an experience that we've never really dealt with before. And I think that usually when you have massive moments like this, it actually allows for more creativity. More people are kind of forced into positions where they can be more entrepreneurial. So I think there'll be a lot of really interesting businesses coming out of this. And then from the investment, more traditional private equity side, prices, you know, multiples are going down, which is, you know, always makes things more interesting to buy. People are more willing to sell. And then from a broader demographic standpoint, we're also seeing an aging, you know, baby boomer generation that's either looking to sell, but also from a healthcare perspective, it's interesting to see how we're going to be treating them and looking at them as a main kind of client in the businesses we're looking at.
Awesome. Thanks, Christian. All right, next up, Michael Feldman.
Yeah, hi, and I apologize for this light behind me. It kind of looks like I have heaven looking down or something, but I'm trying to figure out. I'm in the office and I don't have a camera on my computer, so that's why I'm using my phone. Yeah, I run MSF Capital Advisors, which is a multifamily office, which includes my own family. Quick background, I'm an attorney by training. I'm based here in New York City. I practiced law here for about 14 years. I then started a sports and entertainment company, which is not really active right now, which in a bizarre way led me to start an angel group. And so really, the genesis of MSF Capital is really an angel group. I started in Washington, D.C. We've been investing in, we do primarily direct investments. So anywhere from, I don't do angel investing, but from venture growth to buyout. And then we do some fund investing that is complementary. So we have a little bit of a different approach to our direct investing side. One of the areas we invest in is healthcare. We do have a life science portfolio. We have a diagnostic portfolio, but we, in the more recent years, have really gotten into health and wellness and nutrition. One of our portfolio companies called Food Rocket is a kind of taking, it's called nutrigenomics, taking genomics and nutrition. And we have a couple of pilot projects going on with some professional sports teams. And we think, you know, given what's going on in COVID right now, we think that genomics, that nutrition, health, and wellness are great opportunities, which I'll talk about later for investment.
Fantastic. And it's great to have your food and beverage expertise on this panel as well. It kind of rounds everything out. Thanks, Michael. And Gary Post.
Hey, thanks, Mel. I bring the family office perspective, I think, to this panel. I've worked for family offices either directly in them or as an advisor most of my career. Right now, my family and a number of other families are investing in growth capital opportunities across private equity and venture capital spectrum. We like to get in at the post-seed or small A round, and we'll go up to SpaceX. Anything that characterizes growth is something we want to be in. We like information in all of its aspects, whether it's an e-commerce platform or a data analytics company, that's us. And we like to apply those types of industry perspectives to the healthcare sector, where we invest in all sorts of information-related things, which can include things like telemedicine. And we avoid things like biotech, including companies I can't understand what they do. And we also like nutrition, food, agricultural supply chain with an emphasis on healthy living. And so that what we like to do is have kind of a multiple effect on the company and not just bring them money, but bring them family connections and expertise in the industries that can help them grow. We invest in funds strategically in areas we want to be in, relationships we want. We co-invest with funds, and we do direct investments as well.
Fantastic. Thank you, Gary. I'm going to try to work in your Idiot's Guide to Classical Music into your Q&A later. I appreciate the book collection behind you.
Okay.
Awesome. So hopefully, yeah, beware what you have behind you on these Zoom calls. It's great to learn a little bit more about each of you. It's an impressive panel. So as Kevin said from the outset, if there are questions that you guys have for these folks, please do send them. We'll make sure to get as many of them answered throughout as we can. And I guess my last caution is we'll keep this informal as much as possible. We want this to be fun and engaging for everyone. So hopefully that works for you all. So I'm going to start in with a question for you, Jason. We had a conversation earlier about the difference between some of the short-term trends we see as a result of COVID versus some of the long-term trends. So it'd be great to get your perspective on what you think is a new opportunity in the healthcare and overall investing space because of COVID versus what will be a long-lasting trend once we start to figure out what that new normal looks like.
Yeah, so short-term versus long-term, we've seen, and I think there's definitely some short-term opportunities. We've seen some opportunities in supply chain with supplying PPE. We actually have one company that is not in the healthcare space, but manages supply chains for other retail customers, and they've identified a big opportunity to supply thermometers and tablets that sense temperatures for manufacturing companies. They've sold some to some large auto OEMs. I think some of those are either one-time or very short-term duration activities. We've had other companies in the clinical trial space that have had some big opportunities. On one hand, they've had some of the existing or new trials pushed out, but then they've had even more new trials jumping in front of that for COVID testing and therapeutics that might be coming around the corner. So it's been an opportunity there. I think those will go by the wayside a bit. There will be some longer term trends. Telemedicine is one that's obviously been brought up several times. Home health could accelerate. There's some other unique ones in New York. The number of inquiries for midwives was up 200 to 300% in, I think, April and March. And my guess is that'll continue for a while. And so I think you may see some shifts to procedures that will move outside the hospital. So I think things like ASCs could be big because, you know, I don't have any interest unless it's imminently necessary to be visiting a large medical center because there's just a higher risk of getting infected with anything. One other idea is, you know, telemedicine. I think people expect a big change when these things happen. They tend to be more evolutionary than revolutionary. And I think in telemedicine, what we'll see is it'll be a tool to drive some potential opportunities in other spaces. And in one area, I think if you can think about your typical annual checkup, you go to the doctor, you get your blood drawn, you may get your weight checked, your blood pressure checked, you talk to the doctor for 5 to 10 minutes. It's pretty quick as long as you're relatively healthy. In this day and age, it's really not necessary that you go do that. I mean, if you get life insurance, they'll send someone to your house to take your blood, check your weight, you check your blood pressure, ask you some questions. And so it's entirely feasible that in the next 6 to 12 months, we may see some models where you could go to a Quest or a LabCorp or some other clinic, get all that work done, have the results passed to your doctor, and then have a 10-minute Zoom call. And so I think those opportunities will pop up both on the regular health and wellness side, and then also for more chronic care. You know, somebody who has diabetes or something more chronic where they need to check in more often, and it actually makes it easier for the doctor to monitor them on a monthly or quarterly basis rather than having them come to the office.
That's great. Jason, just a follow-up question. Do you feel like you will take more of a risk on investing in some of the short-term opportunities, or do you suggest waiting to see what sticks in terms of changing consumer behavior?
Yeah, we tend to think over sort of 4 to 7 years. And so we're not really quick. I mean, we can move quickly, but we're not looking for quick flips. And so we'll probably pass on those short-term opportunities and dig in and wait for the longer term trends to come through. Or, again, we're not going to invest in some new technology like a Zoom for healthcare, but what we will do is we may invest in a physician practice or a healthcare services business that's going to leverage those opportunities going forward. So we'll leave the fast-moving investing to the technology and the VC folks.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. Okay, great. Thank you. Christian, I'd love to ask you a question about consumer shifts, because you've spent a lot of time investing in, amongst other areas, kind of more CPG or DTC focused brands in the wellness space. And so I'm curious to hear your thoughts on what you see sticking in terms of shifting consumer expectations, and specifically how we define wellness, because I think it has a certain meaning for a lot of us in the investment community, and it'd be interesting to hear your definition of wellness moving forward.
Yeah, from a behavior standpoint, I see wellness and kind of the fitness experience becoming more and more omni-channel, much in the way that we've seen retail go from, the evolution of the storefront to the store you walk around in, and then to, buying online. And now Amazon allows you to buy online, buy in store, return at UPS, everything. I think we're going to see similar things in the kind of fitness space where, traditionally you would maybe be lucky enough to have your own gym where you just work outside. Then there were gyms, and then there were unique niche fitness studios. Now you can work online. I think people will want to have that similar experience where it's not going to be all in home, because I, as somebody who used to do a lot of workout classes and work out in public places, now doing it at home, I'm looking forward to going back to that whenever I can. Maybe that's also different by age range or whatever, but I do think that people will want to have that full opportunity of experience to do something at home, continue it in a group setting, then do it at the hotel when you're traveling, then do it at the office. We're going to expect that same type of omni-channel presence of fitness that we have for retail. So I think there's going to be some change, but I think we'll still have physical locations, just like we thought retail was dead, but then Amazon's bringing it back to life, and because people want to have that in-person experience or that tangible experience, and we don't really get it at home. So I think from kind of consumer behaviors, that's one I see kind of growing. And so it's thinking about how can we create cohesive experiences in fitness, the same way we have cohesive experiences in retail, at least how Amazon's created one. Maybe that means tracking not just through your Whoop, but how does that track within each individual fitness class I do? And, there's a lot of kind of cool things I think that we can do there. From a broader wellness perspective, I definitely think there is a broader movement to a holistic perspective of, maybe, as someone who was graduating and having my first internship during the great financial crisis, to feeling like I'm in my, I'm hitting my stride in my career, and then COVID kicks, everybody. We've had to a certain extent, not only prioritize business and financial goals, and think more holistically about ourselves, our fitness, our well-being, our mentality, our mental state. So I do think this more holistic experience of, success is not just your bank account. It is, and fitness, not from a weight standpoint, but from an actual health standpoint, and also having a mental element there. I think there's going to be a lot of those things, again, tying in, and we have these fitness trackers. How can we have a mental well-being tracker that then ties in? We've always had a financial tracker as our bank account. So we're now slowly creating ways to share publicly our own fitness and own mental well-being, as well as track and understand it better, and then make better decisions for it.
Yeah, I totally agree. One of the things I'm excited about coming out of this time we're living in is that it is okay to talk about mental health. It has been sort of a stigmatized topic in a lot of circles. Is there anything else that you think is sort of a good outcome of these times, or something that surprised you that used to be a more stigmatized or niche conversation that now everyone is talking about?
Well, stigmatized in one way. I think the mental health aspect is really, really important. I think there are a lot of big conversations coming out of this time. From a kind of mental well-being, and actually I think a fitness standpoint as well, something that's come out of this that I think will also be different depending on, I think people who are maybe 10 years younger than me will revert back to it, and maybe people my age are going to now be in a new normal. is this FOMO, the idea of like having to go to every social engagement, every dinner party, every drinks party, every event, which consists of, you know, for a lot of people, a lot of, you know, a lot of unhealthy eating, a lot of unhealthy drinking habits, a lot of, you know, unhealthy behaviors and lack of sleep. And so I think everyone being forced to stop and not having anything really social to do has allowed people to cook at home, which is often healthier, sleep better because they're sleeping more because they're not out all night or waking up early, you know. And so I think there's some of that hopefully becomes a new normal. I definitely plan to take some of these new behaviors and new kind of habits and keep them. And I'm really excited about that. And I think that's something that, you know, it's a silly stigma, but, you know, being, oh, you're being antisocial, you have to come out, you have to do this. That social pressure, especially in New York City or any major city, or actually anywhere, to be totally frank, is really powerful. And I think this has allowed people to pause, reset, and realize the benefits of like living a slightly slower life. And so I think that's going to hopefully stay and be a little more acceptable.
Oh, yeah, I hope so. Awesome. Thanks, Christian. Michael, I'd like to ask you a couple questions. So knowing you have this sort of broad area of expertise around fitness equipment, food and beverage, well, one, if you're comfortable, we'd love to hear your thoughts about Lululemon's acquisition of Mir yesterday, which we have certainly been talking a ton about. And then two, coming out of this moment, do you think either of those spaces are going to see new innovation, different types of demands, different multiples, different ways of thinking about valuation? I'd love to hear how you're thinking about those two zones in terms of what you're seeing happening in the marketplace right now.
Well, look, there's definitely a trend towards fitness, you know, whether it's an omni-channel, but I think it's going to be a while, given COVID, about people going into a gym. Some gyms have opened up, for example, in Florida, I believe, which I'm not sure if they shut down again. But at least here, the gyms are still shut in New York. I live in New York City. But Peloton, for example, who had opened up some, you know, their own places, are still doing very well in-home sales, right? And actually is picked up, I believe. So I think this is a trend. It's not a fad, it's a trend about more people trying to exercise at home. Look at Mira, it's a perfect example. And then I think, as Christian mentioned, using a more holistic approach to fitness and wellness. And I'll give you a separate comment on the whole kind of telehealth, telemedicine angle. So I have an ex-wife who is a nutritionist and a naturopathic doctor. Her practice has actually increased since the COVID, because if you think about it, when you go into an office, there's a high rate of people who cancel, right, for whatever reason. But you can do a Zoom call, you know, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock at night. Not so that's such a good thing for her, but you could do it while you're in the Hamptons, while you're on vacation. And so it opens up a lot of possibilities doing it, you know, over the internet or some, you know, some other way than actually physically being there, right? So her offices have been closed where she works, but her business, she's seen no slowdown in the number of patients. In fact, it's increased. And I think that's only going to continue. I think that it's going to be a while until we have some type of vaccine where people will want to interact in a closed environment. And so I think that you'll only see increases in whether it's telemedicine, telehealth, in-home fitness areas. And then one other area that I wanted to talk about is, I think this is all great, but I'm a big, as Gary and Kevin knows, we're a big investor in security, in cybersecurity in particular. And you know, one of the ways that we're talking about at least containing the virus until there's a vaccine is through testing and tracing, right? And a lot of people have talked about the privacy issue, which is a big issue, but the security issue, I think, is just as big, because if our data, at the end of the day, right, it's about our data. and it's got to be safe and secure. And so I think that's another great opportunity in terms of investments.
Excellent. No, that's really helpful. And I think the cybersecurity connection to healthcare is an interesting one. Yeah, it's a space you know a lot about. So thank you for sharing that. Gary, it would be great to hear your thoughts on how you've shifted your investment philosophy over the last couple of months, and specifically how you're evaluating or changing your approach to evaluating new and existing fund managers. And maybe, overall shifts you're seeing in your investment strategy given the nature of these times.
I think we've gone a little bit later stage, and we see opportunities to get in at later stage where we may have been involved in a quasi startup. We're not doing those now. We think those companies are substantially more fragile, but we are seeing a lot more opportunities to support growing companies that, rather than getting in at the $3 million sales level, we'll get in at the $15 or $20 million sales level. And many of those companies are welcoming new equity for both growing and for more security. So we've shifted there. Another thing we're looking for is managers, GPs that can really help companies. So we're putting a higher hurdle or criteria on people that can get their hands really dirty, although admittedly a lot of so that's changed part of our philosophy. We've also kind of narrowed down our focus because we've seen that we don't have to be as broad to have great participation in the marketplace. So we're now down to really 3 segments that I mentioned earlier. Anything information, of course, which is a huge area. Anything on the food and ag supply chain that makes things healthier, including basic supply chain mechanics to keep food fresher and safer. And of course, the healthcare sector that we're, I think, renewing our focus on because we see a trend again towards more disruption, more at-home things, taking technologies like an oximeter can measure the amount of oxygen in your blood. You can buy one now for, $50, $60. And that's huge in terms of monitoring people who have respiratory issues and such. And so people that are following trends have to follow trends because they can't before. So whatever trend was there is being accelerated. And certainly the healthcare sector being so huge, so many opportunities, and characterized by no winners, really no one winner. There's not going to be a one winner in a lot of categories. So just one example, we've looked at sleep monitoring, big issue, one that's being talked about more. And now there are at-home sleep monitors that are highly effective, either completely non-invasive or minimally invasive to tackle one of the huge healthcare issues we have today in the general population.
Fantastic. A follow-up question for you, just given the nature of your subject matter expertise, how closely do you monitor your investments, whether they're direct into companies or into funds? Are you more hands-on now? Have you always been hands-on? It would be good to hear a little bit of how you're addressing the way that you can monitor and just stay close to each of your investments.
Yeah, that's really a wonderful question. And we're more involved than ever. I think that we were pretty much hands-off. We often invested with managers and such that had more expertise and more money at risk than we did. Now we're a little bit more on our toes, understanding that some of those GPs might be stretched thin across their portfolio. So we're a bunch more hands-on and having direct calls with companies that we might not have had calls with before. And one of the particular reasons for that is we're on the lookout for opportunities where across our family, our network of families, that we can make some introductions that can help the company. So we're much more hands-on, and I think I'm busier than ever. I walk into my home office and I'm pretty much strapped there all day long. And it's kind of working back in office seems, and going to conferences and such seems a lot easier than what I'm doing now. But we're getting a lot accomplished, and I'm pleased with that.
Awesome. That's great to hear. I know we only have a few more minutes. I would love to, if we have time, kind of hear from each of you. And Jason, we'll start with you. Just about maybe one thing that surprised you over the last couple of months in terms of your area of focus. Is there one trend, one success story, or even one failure that has surprised you? And hopefully I'll have a chance to hear from each of you on this question.
Well, that's a great question. I think a lot of them, I don't have answers on all of them yet, but there's definitely been a lot of surprises. I think one surprise that that I think that came across was the impact of the healthcare system. And you know, and I think, you know, if you thought forward enough steps, you could certainly envision a scenario where the hospitals would be focused on COVID patients and therefore not treating other disease states and therapeutic areas. But I think the dramatic shift in how that happened and that healthcare essentially shut down for a number of months was quite surprising. And I think there's one big impact that some people are talking about that people aren't really talking about too much yet, is that a lot of elective procedures have been deferred. And so there's going to be a lot of people that, whether it's catching that initial cancer diagnosis or identifying some other type of screening, that we actually had one of our CEOs was actually diagnosed with a, I don't want to say minor, but a case of cancer, and went through the treatment process during COVID, which is very, very alarming. And so I think there'll be a lot of two things that come out of that. One, there'll be some backlog in healthcare treatments toward the tail end of this year. And then two, I think it's probably going to push a lot of people to become much more aware of their health. And I think people are taking matters into their own hands. I mean, if you don't have access to your doctor, people are researching COVID symptoms online. I saw a stat yesterday, 39% of people are eating healthier if they're at home. And so and they're 51% are actually making their own meals more often. And so I think there's a lot of good trends, as people have mentioned here. And, you know, I think initially, a lot of us probably thought of it as some length of shutdown and then getting back to business as usual. But I think the big surprise to me is how many opportunities are coming out of this and how many silver linings. And so I think on one hand, we're triaging the challenges and dealing with the things we've got to deal with. On the other hand, at some point, we're starting to look forward into some of these, what might be sort of great opportunities for new or emerging things.
Oh, great answer. Thank you. Christian, I'd love to hear the same from you, and knowing we have about 10 minutes from each of you as well. If you have any closing thoughts or anything that you wanted to share that we didn't have a chance to discuss. But yeah, first, like, any surprises coming out of this time?
Yeah, I mean, a ton of surprise. Everything's been a little bit surprising, but one thing that we were pleasantly surprised with was an investment that we've made at Trident into, we're doing a roll-up of optometry clinics in Arizona. And we particularly picked Arizona for several reasons. You know, there are a lot of young families, there's an aging demographic there. And so we assume that COVID hits and everything's going to kind of be, you know, just shut down. And what ended up happening was the optometry clinics that we bought were actually deemed essential services, and we're able to stay open, and people in that region or the areas that we're buying in kept going. And it kind of was a pleasant surprise that our thesis around, you find a demographic that actually really requires a certain service, they're still going to go use it, even though, you know, maybe the technology to do at-home eye service is not there yet. But people think that, you know, everyone's going to be able to do things at home. Some things you can't. And if you're smart about where you're looking, you can kind of ride through some of these tougher times. But, you know, that was a pleasant surprise.
Yeah, we'll take the pleasant surprises, right? Great. Michael, same question for you. Just any good, bad surprises. We don't mind talking about failures too, because sometimes we learn.
I was talking about this the other day to somebody. I think there's an interesting dichotomy that's come up from an investor's point of view. Couple of the deals that we're doing now, just about finished. Obviously, valuations have come way down, right? And so, you know, valuations come down. We've seen 20, 30% in some cases, and that's obviously been good as an investor. But on the other hand, we're also seeing in many cases exits at much lower prices or valuations as well. So a lot of companies are kind of raising, not what I'd call necessarily bridge financing, but really financing to kind of give them a little bit of a longer runway, because they hope that, you know, maybe in a year or two, exit multiples will go higher, right? Or get back to somewhat what they used to be. So I think that's if you have capital, I think you're sitting in the cat seat right now. And I think that's only going to continue in the near future. And then the second thing, which I think is, you know, mostly, I don't know a lot about your fund, but a fund manager on another webinar mentioned this, is probably it's a great time to invest in new funds. And that's what when we do funds, we do what's called emerging managers, because you don't really have too many legacy portfolio issues right now, where some of the more established funds are probably, you know, trying to put out fires in their, you know, existing portfolio companies. And we had that same issue ourselves, at least, you know, a couple of months ago. And so new funds or newer funds that, you know, don't have these legacy issues are probably a good place to look to invest to, because they don't have the, you know, a lot of legacy issues.
Oh, that's fantastic to hear. Selfishly, we found that to be the case. You know, when we first started our fund, we were still raising our first round. I think there was more hesitation just because we didn't have that track record, and now being sort of fresh to this space is seen as more of a strength for our fund. So it's great to hear that. Thanks for the vote of confidence. Gary, same question for you. Any surprises, anything that you would love to share in terms of success or failure right now?
Sure, I'd like to echo Jason's comment, is people taking greater responsibility for their health, not because they necessarily want to, but it's out of necessity, because they can't get in to see doctors. Like, oh, I'll go in to see a doctor. They didn't have necessarily that option or wanted to take the risk even of doing so. So that is a surprising good trend, and I think that is going to continue and spill over to investment opportunities. Second good surprise was the resiliency of managements, at least in our portfolio and funds portfolio, to react extremely quickly to COVID, to apply for government assistance. And we talked to people quickly, and I would say generally people were really on their toes, being proactive and working. Secondly, or I guess that thirdly, is raising equity capital. That's what we do. We're not debt investors. We're primarily strict equity investors. And more companies are coming out with kind of senior equity or pieces that extend their runway. And the big statistic or parameter is how many months of runway do you have, and particularly for the early stage companies. And many companies are addressing that. I think there's some companies that are going to be so stuck for a while. I don't know how quickly they're going to get out, but also I'm not sure how well they'll be supported by private equity firms. I think Michael's thought of, gee, a fresh fund that doesn't have these issues is maybe freer of their mind to do investing than to have companies possibly going under and being distracted by mega problems as compared to looking ahead with a fresh slate. Good comment, Michael. Let's compare notes, huh?
Fantastic. Just to wrap up, I guess, and if you guys want to unmute and we can just have an open conversation as we close this out. Any final words? Are you investing right now? Is there anyone in this network who might be able to bring some value to the work that you're doing right now? And Jason, maybe we can just start with any closing statements from you on where you would like to take this conversation, and just any last thoughts for the audience.
Yeah, no, we're, I mean, as we've said, we're open for business. I think we're being extremely selective and cautious. So as I mentioned on the healthcare side, I mean, we're certainly, we've got businesses that are packaging up sort of health and wellness options. So not pharmaceuticals, but sort of powdered goods and things like that that go into protein bars or powders, sports drinks. And so we're always, and then we've got other examples of businesses in the healthcare space. We're always looking for add-on acquisitions. I think that's one particular area where we're going to see a lot of opportunity. On the investing side, the platform business may not necessarily come at a big discount, but I think there's a lot of small businesses that something like 40% of companies, franchises and dentist offices have said they will go out of business by year end. And so those folks will, be looking for a partner to join with rather than just shut down their business because they can't do that. So we think there's opportunity on the add-on side. We're, as I mentioned, on the healthcare services side, I think there'll be plenty of opportunities. And so I'm excited and I'm looking forward to it. And if there's any ideas, I'm always happy to discuss and review.
Fantastic. Christian, any closing thoughts? I know you're investing. Anything else that you'd like to share?
No, I echo that. We particularly like these healthcare service businesses that, don't have high reimbursement rates, that are recurring, and in regions where you have either an aging demographic or a lot of young families that tend to go, we're not looking for services that are provided to the, early 30, late 20-year-olds to go to the doctors, once every couple of years. Yeah, so we're open to look at, particularly in the optometry space in Arizona, if you know any, but we're always looking at interesting opportunities for those investments. And then on the family office side, love looking and working with early stage startups, whether it's pre-seed, friends and family round to seed. I've built companies myself and have invested in many, so enjoy kind of investing and also just being a support if possible.
Awesome. Great to hear. Michael, any closing asks of this team or any thoughts you'd like to share?
Yeah, I know we're running out of time. I think I mentioned this on the pre-call. The area that I'm the most excited about right now is kind of putting this kind of ecosystem around sports, health and wellness, VR, and big data. And so it's a very big project. It involves a number of investment groups. It involves about 7 or 8 companies at the moment. It's a pretty big project, but it brings me back to sports, which is where I kind of came from. And I love big data. We've made a number of investments in big data companies in the past, in VR in the past, in health and wellness, and now kind of putting this platform together with a bunch of pretty well-known athletes and so forth is probably the most exciting thing I have on my plate right now for me.
That sounds great. I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah.
All right, Gary.
Love to hear ideas from anyone on the panel or the audience about good models that can be successful. And we're particularly interested in models that give more control over people's lives to people. And on the opposite end of the spectrum, we're concerned about excessive regulation in the healthcare sector, and we want to stay pretty clear of that. So welcome ideas, novel concepts to deliver healthcare and healthcare management to the people. So please contact me.
Perfect. All right. I think that's it for our awesome 4 panelists. Thank you guys so much for taking the time. I hope this was helpful for everyone watching. I'm excited to know you all and excited to see what's coming up next. So Kevin, I think I'm going to pass it on to you.
Excellent. Thank you, Mel. And thank all of you for taking time and offering your expertise. A really interesting conversation. Moving on, though, I want to make sure we have plenty of time for the next discussion, a conversation really between Jonathan LaCrosse and Lance Armstrong. Jonathan LaCrosse is the founder and managing member of LaCrosse Investments 37-4. He's operated in a variety of roles as an LP, GP, placement agent. And on a personal level, I have to say, I've really enjoyed his kind of long-term perspective and a steady hand at the wheel in recent weeks. We're expanding and trying to be creative with content like this and get discussions going. And with that, Jonathan, please share a bit more on your background, as I certainly left a lot of room for expansion. Give us a bit of your background and lead us in this conversation with Lance.
Great, thanks, Kevin. Appreciate the opportunity. I'm coming to you from Boulder, Colorado here today. I rode my bike to the office like I do every day, so I thought it was appropriate with the helmet in the background to leave it hanging as we talk to Lance. So anyway, my background is a bit eclectic. Was with one of the largest healthcare foundations in the country for a dozen years at the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, and then was an LP running an emerging manager fund-to-fund for CalPERS, and then was CEO of a software company called Trusted Insight, which was a marketplace connecting GPs and LPs. And then for the last 9 years have been a placement agent, working with a lot of fund groups and including a lot of success in healthcare. And we've raised about $4.5 billion. So it's been a fun ride. Let's get started. You're not here to listen to me, here to get views from Lance Armstrong. So let me give a overview of Lance. Most folks know who he is, but Lance is a globally known cyclist and endurance athlete. He has recently co-founded a new venture firm called Next Ventures, and they are an Austin-based venture capital firm. They're designed to maximize growth opportunities in the exploding sports and fitness and wellness markets, which our panel just touched on. Lance co-founded the firm with Melanie Strong, who was on prior to here, and then Lionel Conacher. And Next Ventures invests in late seed, Series A and B stage startups that all have revenue producing product or service that can optimize human performance from the elite athlete to the weekend warrior, and also has the potential to translate to the general population. So Lance, why did you decide to start a venture fund, and maybe touch on some of the angel investments that led you to get this formal fund off the ground?
Yeah, it's a good question. Thanks, Jonathan. So, and frankly, it's a model that hasn't, it's not unique. I mean, I was in the, as I guess years ago, sort of stepped back out, started to create content primarily around the podcast space, with no expectations. I didn't know that, how big the audience would grow to be. To my surprise, it grew quite big, quite quickly. Just to give you some numbers, in 2019, we had a total of about 15 million downloads on the one show. So as this show grew, the audience grew, then I started to see a lot of really cool and interesting deal flow, interesting opportunities. This is the point where it's just not that unique, not to minimize it, but you see it quite frequently with people, especially in the health and wellness space, but in all parts of culture. And so as I watched the audience grow, the deal flow pile up, in my mind, I just started to think, what if we then created, before we created, we built a team, raised a fund, had a pool of capital to invest in the most interesting opportunities, and then to complete the flywheel, what happens when we use the audience and the content to promote the deals. And so again, some things that have been done with people like Tim Ferriss or Chris Sacca or Gary Vee, or a lot of the names we know, Ben Greenfield in the fitness space. And so that was the idea on paper. We didn't know that that it would be as impactful as it has been, and as significant as it has been for some of our portfolio companies. But when we've been able to authentically integrate them back into the content, it's pretty neat to see. And so, we built out this three-legged stool between myself and Mel and Lionel. We augmented that team with probably what I think is one of the best advisory boards that we could have possibly put together. That isn't just a face and a bio on a website, but also, and more importantly, is a group that's super engaged. So our ability to assess deal flow, get to the answer as quick as possible, and make a decision, and then ultimately support young companies, young entrepreneurs.
That's great. Thanks, Lance. So maybe you could talk about the parallels between cycling and investing. Riding my bike, I know how much hard work it is just to get around some of these hills here in Boulder. So I can only imagine, the Tour de France. So maybe you can touch on that.
It's a good question. So when people watch specifically the Tour, if a guy wins the race, wins the yellow jersey in Paris, he stands on the top step with the jersey all alone. If you just looked at it briefly, you would think that was an individual event. The reality is he just spent 20 days, probably, it depends on the year, close to 2,500 miles, all the elements, whether it's weather, wind, crashes, punctures, all of these things with 7 guys surrounding him. So without the team and without the support of the team, think about it, you have 200 riders in total. That's a crowded group going down a narrow road. There's no one person that could win the race alone. And so I think, to my point of the advisory board, to the point of our full, the team of the 3 of us, really it's a team effort. And, when I came out of cycling, I always kind of chuckled because people thought it was a quick blush. It's an individual sport. And these guys were, if you think about the 2,500 mile Tour de France, if you broke it down and you thought about the amount of miles that you actually rode alone, it would be less than 100. And so the rest of the time, you're sitting on the wheel, seeking support, trusting your team.
That's great. So if you could talk about what differentiates you from other venture firms, particularly those that are focused on health and wellness. And I know, you add a tremendous amount of value, so does your advisory board, but maybe you can touch on that.
Yeah, I think, we obviously have, it's funny because to go back to your last question, it's, to us, this isn't a competition. There are other firms and funds who are focused on health and wellness. We don't view them as competition. We view them most of the time as partners. We share deal flow, we share notes, we share experience. We share things like this. We do stuff like this all the time. But when we look at what differentiates ourselves from anybody else, it's really the flywheel, right? And it's, as we all know, it's hard to raise money, but once the money's raised, then you're sitting on this pool of capital. It's sometimes tough to put together the smartest team possible, but ultimately, good people do. But what we have been able to bring to it is the flywheel. And that's something that, frankly, is the reason I think we get called more often than not, because as our peers and our partners in a lot of these deals realize they have capital and they have people, but they don't have the flywheel. They don't have the access. And the flywheel, by the way, too, is the advisory board. They may want access to one of our advisory board members, some of the due diligence there, some of the experience, but then also the potential to integrate into this flywheel, which, in a kind of lazy, aw shucks way, has built up this really big audience that the data is there. The audience is very sticky, and it's one thing that I just continue to be humbled by. But I think that's the differentiator, that us having that flywheel in our pocket.
Lance, I think you're being humble there. Not too many people get to host Saturday Night Live or be on ESPN 30 for 30. So I'm sure you have a lot of access to PR that most other firms don't. And you're probably one phone call away, including Mel and Lionel as well, and their connections. But maybe you could just touch about how important PR is. Having run a startup company myself, and that was venture backed, getting the word out is extremely important. Maybe you could talk about that and how you're able to help there. Yeah,
honestly, I'm a little jaded when it comes to the press and the media. I've had let's just use those two things as bookends. Saturday Night Live, which I hosted in 2005, 2006, and then the most recent 30 for 30, which came out just a few weeks ago. You know, it's run the gamut of everything in between, and I'm fully aware of the situation and have both feet on the ground. I know who wakes up every morning. And so but I'm also not, I'm just not going to play that game. I think in this day and age, being in 2020, we can control. In the past, you couldn't control the media. You couldn't control content. You couldn't control production and distribution and direction. It's a beautiful thing. It's 2020. I mean, anybody can. Jonathan, you could have a podcast in the next 5 minutes. I promise you. And so it's been a real blessing for me to say, okay, I'm going to step away from letting other people tell my story. Obviously, I was involved with the 30 for 30 in the sense that I participated in all the interviews freely and openly. I opened up my family for that project. We don't need to get into that. But aside from that, you really don't need, I don't need to call NBC and say, hey, can I be on the Tour de France coverage? Because I now have 15 million people a day that watch my show talking about, and it's so remarkably easy that, you know, if we call that PR, if you call that media, what content, whatever you call it, it's just been a real, you know, 5 years ago, we couldn't have done it. Certainly not 10 years ago, but, and it'll only be more and more, as I like to say, it's, there's no need to make a straight line crooked. And this is the straightest shot that I think we've ever seen in society.
So given some of the comments that we heard earlier from the panel members and, you know, trends going forward now, what are some of the areas that you guys are looking at in next ventures? You know, there's been a lot of talk about telehealth. And I know that that's one area for you guys. Maybe you can touch on a couple of themes that are now of focus for next ventures.
Well, it was a bunch of great points. I agree with, you know, basically all of them. And I think that this whole thing has been turned on its head. I think the way we view health and wellness today is so drastically different than the way we viewed it 6 months ago. It came up, this idea of going to gyms and whether or not people go now, will they go in the future? If you put me on the spot, I don't have an answer for that. I really don't. And you know, that extends way beyond the health and wellness space. Before we got online, I just saw the news alert that the big music festival in our hometown of Austin, ACL Fest, has been canceled for this year. Obviously, other big events. I mean, all of these experiences that we really took for granted have been drastically changed. And another great example is Peloton. I mean, here's an example of a brand and a platform that, you know, not for me. You know, I like to joke with the team that I'm sort of an outdoor kitty. But you know, it's John Foley, who started Peloton and still runs it to this day, is probably sitting around going, holy hell, thank God for this COVID thing. It's changed his business probably forever. You know, I was candidly, I wasn't a big believer in that vision long term, but who saw this coming? You know, all of the other things that I think the thing that, especially sleep, you know, as we are big believers in sleep data and the Oura Ring specifically. I think there's a part two to that. I think it's one thing to tell somebody that, hey, you slept like shit last night. It's a whole other thing to tell them, here's how you fix it. And so that's, you know, we work day and night on yes, it's good to have the analytics, but it's even better to have the hack, right? So how do we fix, I'm sort of spoiled. I sleep like a baby. My better half, Anna, doesn't sleep at all. We try everything, and it just, you know, bad sleepers really struggle. And so the quicker we can get to, as I said, the sort of the biohack on that, the better. The one last thing I'll say is that the data that we love the most, because we were always believers in health and wellness, we believed in this space. COVID comes along. It almost seems like people doubled down. Again, the panel talked about this. We call it a reset. This was really a moment for America and the world to hit reset, whether it was diet, nutrition, fitness, exercise, wellness, whatever you call it. The coolest thing without COVID is that the data will show you that the youngest generation, which is yet to be named, right? So the one that comes after Gen Z, cares more about their health and wellness than any other generation in the history of the world. So we'd all be in trouble if, and I have a 20-year-old son and 18-year-old twin girls and 11 and a 9-year-old, we'd all be in trouble if my 18-year-old girl said, you know what, I think I'm just going to vape all day and sit on my ass and not do anything. We would be out of business as a fund. The reality is that they're all looking at diet and even on down to my little ones. It's, am I gluten intolerant? Am I lactose intolerant? These are questions I'm like, you're 9. Like when I was 9, I was like, where's the Fruit Loops? Let's go. And so it's just an awareness that I think will again, for us, it's our wheelhouse. It's something we believe in, not just ourselves, but the advisory board, and exciting times.
I know that you guys have made, I think it's 8 investments in your fund. Can you tell us a little bit more? You mentioned Ure, the ring. Maybe you can touch on that one, and then some of the other companies in the portfolio today.
Yeah, so the one that's probably getting the most press right now is the Oura Ring. It's our belief that it's the most accurate commercially available sleep tracker. There was talk about on the earlier panel about invasiveness. Completely invasive. You have no idea it's on your finger as you sleep. It's also an activity tracker. Its strength really lies in sleep tracking. But there's 2 ways to go about tracking activity and sleep. That's either through the finger or through the wrist. We've made the bet on the finger, to be honest. So the competition on the wrist is the Fitbit, the Apple Watch, the Whoop. We think the data supports and suggests that the finger is a much more accurate place for these key measurements. They're really, really in the news right now. They just rolled out this partnership with the NBA. So unfortunately, I also saw online this morning that the commissioner of the NBA is considering, or there's talk now that maybe they don't roll out in Orlando, but assuming they do, every player, every trainer, every coach, everybody as part of an organization will be wearing the ring. It was created to be a sleep tracking device. Lo and behold, it became also a device that really accurately measures core temp. And so as the body wears down, the body gets sick, the core temp goes up. And so they've launched a bunch of studies, one with UCSF, one with the University of West Virginia, monitoring core temp, predicting COVID. And so they have people that are seeing their readiness score come down, their core temp going up, going, holy shit, I'm getting sick. Next thing you know, diagnosed. And so been a wild journey with them. A bunch of other really smart investors there. We're honored to be a part of it. There's about 7 or 8 other investments. Our most recent investment is a media platform out of Boulder, Colorado called Pocket Outdoor, right down the street from you, I'm assuming, Jonathan, but Pocket Outdoor Media, which is a mix of some old assets in the media space combined with another group of assets called Active Interest Media, which is a yoga journal, clean living, the entire Warren Miller media catalog, but really, which, who's betting on sort of old school media today? Not many people. We participated in this round with Jazz Ventures and Zone 5. This is kind of a new way to imagine digital media, digital subscription. As we all know, subscription is kind of the magic word after Peloton. So we're excited about that one. Hammerhead, a company that's a new gen bike computer. I tell people it's sort of like taking grandma's flip phone and grandkids' iPhone 11 Pro. That's the difference between a Hammerhead and a Garmin, actually. And I'm on the board there. As soon as we hang up here, I'm on our quarterly board call, board Zoom, as we all know it now. SteadyMD, a great investment in telehealth that we made about a year ago. Again, pre-COVID, all this madness. We just liked the platform. We liked, at the time, they were licensed in all 50 states. That's now sort of the norm. At the time, it wasn't, but we really lucked into that one. And then finally, and I just keep all these gadgets at my desk. It's so funny, but PowerDot, which is a at-home mobile e-stim unit for any ache or illness, or not illness, but any ailment. It's to us, that little package that I showed you, the size of a CD, an old CD changer, for $200 really packs the punch of a $5,000 complex machine that you would have to drive to the chiropractor's office or the physical therapist's office or the doctor's office to get. Now you can do at home, which again, another one that just we really lucked into with the current state of affairs.
Thanks, Lance. I want to encourage the audience to send in any questions. One that we want to touch on that's the hot topic, you mentioned SteadyMD. We've been using it, my family, telehealth for the last 3 years. My son just used it yesterday. Maybe you could just talk a little bit about the statistics on at SteadyMD, what's happened over the last 3.5 months, and what trends do you see coming out of that? Yeah,
who would have, I mean, you talk about turning something on its head. Here's an idea, right? An idea or a platform that I think almost met some sort of a stigma 6 months ago. People were like, oh, yeah, I have to talk to my doctor on FaceTime or on my phone. That feels weird. Why can't I go actually talk to them? It's almost done a 180. I mean, people don't want to go sit in a waiting room. They don't want to touch the magazines that are sitting in the waiting room. They'd rather, overnight, this has become almost the norm. And, obviously and selfishly for us, it couldn't have come at a sooner time. Steady's interesting. They were really founded on this idea of catering to athletes. They grew so quickly and became so popular that they broadened their platform. But the original idea was, hey, if you're Jonathan, you're a cyclist and you like to do 2 of the things, whether it's yoga or go to the gym, here's a doctor who fits your type. And so really catered to athletes, whether it's runners, cyclists, triathletes, CrossFitters, etc. And then they, if you go dig into the platform, you still see that, but it's now much broader than it used to be. I think the thing for me and for us to really optimize, I mean, let's just be candid and frank, to optimize that relationship, as I think of it, right? And you have a telehealth platform, you have a pool of doctors, and you have this pool of patients. If 50% of the patients say, hey, doc, I'm just not getting good sleep, right? So the secret sauce then says, well, have you tried the Aura Ring, right? As part of this whole partnership, this whole team that we're all integrated on. Or if the patient says, I got some knee pain. I went out for a run yesterday, I came back, or a week ago I came back, and it's just not the same. Well, have you tried the PowerDot? So for us, if we could, the quicker and the better and the more efficiently we can integrate all of our, without being, I think we have to be authentic and careful. But if those are possibilities, hey, these are, that to us, again, is another part of the secret sauce.
We have a question here from the audience, Lance. Does the COVID pandemic move healthcare toward urgent care or more institutional doctor practices in hospitals? They're saying that they can see patients wanting not to put themselves at risk by entering a place that will have a greater chance of COVID infection. I don't know if you want to touch on urgent care and what you're seeing there.
It's I think that's right. And I'll just use an example. Obviously this pandemic hit first hit hard in Asia, then really hit hard in Western Europe, primarily Spain and Italy. And then of course is now hit here, and who knows where we are on this bell curve. But I remember before we really understood the significance of it, I was watching cyclists, right, via social media or whatever in Europe that were not riding outside. It would be a beautiful, warm, sunny day. And every part of your being would say, I'm going to go outside and ride my bike. they were staying inside, and what we call them home trainers. So they're more competitive. So they wouldn't be on a Peloton type device. They'd be on their bike on a home trainer. They were riding inside for the sole reason that, of course, if you go outside and you're riding on the road, you have interaction with cars, with all the elements. And two things: if something were to happen, would you get the quickest care possible? But also, in the way that I was watching it portrayed, if something were to happen, if you got hit by a car and broke your leg and you had to go to the hospital, would you be taking a bed from somebody that needed it? And so it was this level of social responsibility. And of course, as I've fully disclosed earlier, I'm an outdoor kiddie. I'm like, holy shit, this is not good. You know, I'm gonna have to stay inside. And so I think that's right. And I think we haven't, I sort of shudder to think at what this fall will be like. It's going to be, I think we're all going to be a little surprised.
We got another question here from the audience. Is your next team or yourself intending for much non-US products sales for your portfolio companies? And what have your market research shown? So really, go ahead.
So per the docs, we will invest in 75%. 75% of our deals will be in North America. Two of our investments are actually out of Canada. Our partner Lionel is obviously grew up and from Toronto, now lives in San Francisco. But one of our most recent investments, Kinetics, is based in Calgary. Outside of that, the world is really open for us, and not just for investing, but obviously for sales and marketing, and whether it be the Oura Ring or PowerDot. Obviously, something like SteadyMD is a little more specific to the U.S. But yeah, I mean, sleep issues are not exclusive to Americans. So, and certainly with a story like the partnership with the NBA, that's just going to get told. I mean, imagine the potential. As big as the NBA is, as big as LeBron James is in China, India, I mean, that's a global story. Right. And so for them to tell that story on a global stage, very smart move on their part. Yeah, we're not, and we look at deal flow from all over the world. We're a little obliged to stick to the rules, which we're fine to do. But that 25%, whether it could be Germany, could be Israel, could be Brazil, doesn't matter. We love good deals.
Great. We have another question here for you, Lance. Do you invite other investors into your deal flow, such as, I'm assuming that we're talking about co-invest here and with other family offices, or do you only co-invest with other VCs?
We've done both. I mean, obviously, you guys and gals understand how this works. The answer to that is yes, we've done that. We like to think that if we've spent the time, done the homework, and made, the gut check decision to invest, that it isn't just, and again, I don't think I'm speaking out of turn or telling you guys and gals something you don't know or appreciate. It's tough to say, well, just come right, go ahead and hitch on and see you later at the end of the day. The answer is yes. It gets a little, as you all can appreciate, it gets a little potentially messy sometimes.
We've got another question here. Kevin would like to ask this other one, and then we've got a bunch more questions here. So as a top athlete, how do you anticipate technology, data, software, but also new materials such as the Nike Vaporfly to impact performance, recovery, and training methods? And then how fast can this become mainstream and accepted? Swimsuit like the LZR Racer is not allowed anymore for competition.
It's a great question. I actually had this conversation with somebody I was on a ride with yesterday. We were speaking about Kipchoge's sub 2-hour marathon, all of the science and research and technology that was used that enabled, not an official world record, but he still broke 2 hours, but everything down, from the shoes, he actually used one of our other investments in Amp Human. He used the PR lotion over his entire body, which buffers lactic acid, but also just the laser in the road showing him the ideal line to take for 26 miles. So assessing turning radius, gradient, all of these things. So he just followed a dot. So we started talking about the shoes. And so the question is, like they did in swimming and outlawed, the sort of the full body swimsuit, there's talk that the governing body of running comes in and cracks down on these shoes. I mean, the shoes are called the 4%ers. That's a true statement. I mean, and so the question is, if Nike has a 4%er and Adidas has a 4%er, but Hoka doesn't have a 4%er and New Balance doesn't have a 4%er, what happens to the athletes that are contracted with New Balance or Hoka? They're down 4%. That's so, you know, I'm torn on that. I mean, I can see that they would want to regulate that. The innovator in me and the sort of the business side of me says, well, what's wrong with you? Why don't you go make a 4%er? You have a budget for research and development. Go make a 4%er. And so we'll see what they do. It'll be interesting. I suspect that they'll regulate that just like they did in swimming.
And then the last comment here, if you could touch on this for 30 seconds or so, just why the future is so bright for Next Ventures.
Well, I'll go back to what I said. The future is bright because the future is a believer. And when I say the future, this future generation, you know, again, if they all decided that sitting on their butts and eating Cheetos was the next thing they wanted to do, we'd be in trouble. But the fact that they're engaged and focused and care about their health and wellness and longevity, and not just knowing about it, but figuring out a way to fix it. Again, going back to the sleep thing, it's one thing to know you don't sleep well. It's a whole nother thing to say to yourself, how do I fix it? And what am I going to use to fix it? And that's what we're all about. Yeah, it's great. I mean, we love Aura, but we also would, in sleep, as I'm just using sleep as an example, it could be performance, it could be clarity, it could be recovery, it could be all these things that we all lump into this one big, cool, sexy word of optimization, right? And so it's my belief and our belief, and we're excited about it, that the future cares about being optimized.
Great. Thank you so much, Lance. Appreciate all your time and your insights here. And we're going to turn it back over to Kevin. We got one more presentation.
Clearly, Lance is all about optimization, and there are just a lot of trends we've heard from everyone where we need to be optimizing things, finding new solutions, and the way that Next Ventures seems to be bringing, you know, things that Lance was doing to test his performance that was sometimes onerous, and now making it so convenient with things like the Aura Ring or whatever it may be. It's fascinating, and I can see I need to catch up on some of Lance's content. It's easy to get caught up in you know, his comments, and because of that, actually we're running a few minutes behind, but I hope you can stick around as we move into a quick presentation on some material from Ken Chiang, who is operating out of Hong Kong and submitted this presentation and is live on the box to take some questions and give us some insights into what he's doing at Redwood Peak on the public equity side, Chinese equities. And with that, I am going to make his material live. Please enjoy.
Good morning. Thanks very much for spending some time with me. Kevin, thank you very much for inviting me to your private investment forum on healthcare. I'm Ken Chiang. I work with the Redwood Peak China Fund, founder and CIO. Started the company 6 years ago as a spinoff from the Chilton Investment Company in 2007. So we've been around for almost 15 years now. So we invest in the China space, and particularly in very fast-moving, growing companies that are geared towards the new consumer in China. $1.4 billion person market with an average per capita income of $10,000 per person, growing still at a rate of 5% per annum. We have a process of investing in concentrated companies, returns that are very strong over the last 6 years now, almost, as an independent company that we've been running with performance that's been double the benchmark. We've compounded at north of 12% per annum since we started. And we'll go through a little bit about our process now. My background, I came from Merrill Lynch Asset Management, where I started my career in 1991. Ran several funds there, including an emerging markets fund and a global small cap fund. Was voted in Barron's and Morningstar at the time as top in category. We have an investment team that's dedicated to this product. About half a dozen of us work out of Hong Kong, including a very international group of very smart and motivated folks from China, as well as from Canada, and myself from the US. Our performance has been nothing short of strong. So 82% versus 44% against the MSCI China index. Year to date, we're up 13% versus the MSCI index, which is almost flat for the year. In terms of our process, we screen through companies on a quantitative basis, looking for the fastest growing companies. We also talk to companies and look for companies that are cutting edge. As you know, the world of unicorns in China and new growth companies is larger than that of the United States. There's more multi-billion-dollar companies in China in the private pipeline that goes public. And because of these dislocations like this COVID issue, there have been some great opportunities in the public space to buy companies even cheaper than in the private spaces. So we do a lot of due diligence, deep work. Most of us have some private equity background from the past. But our main mantra is to focus on really good quality managements, companies that have high levels of integrity, that are going to work for us, work for you, invest in strong business franchises that are very defendable with high barriers to entry, but get them at a reasonable price. We also have a focus on ESG, that's sustainable environmental, social, and governance values, which we think is very important given the amount of pollution and some of the governance issues that pervade the emerging markets. In terms of our average ESG score, we're higher than the average at 4 versus about 3.5 for the MSCI China than our peer group. Why invest in China? Well, it's got a large pool of companies with 3,000 listed companies. Its GDP growth rate is still growing at north of 5%, although it's down from the heady 10% growth rates of the past. There's a lot of companies globally which have huge exposure to China: Apple, Daimler, Qualcomm, with up to 50% of the revenue from China. In terms of domestic markets, it's very strong too. A company called Trinli is what you see on the right side. We invested in about 1.5 years ago. It's a company that makes devices for joint replacement as well as for hip replacement. Huge growing market with lifestyles that are improving, 1/9 the penetration of procedures versus the US, a car population that's the largest in the world and growing still at only about 25% penetration against 70% penetration in the United States. More cars on the road, more car accidents, more hip procedures, more surgery that needs to be done. So the market potential is fantastic. Let's go through an example of Trinli since we're on the subject. The company, as you can see, has about 2/3 of its revenue coming from hip replacement, 1/3 coming from knee replacement, and some spinal products. Most of its sales come from China, with the exception of 5%, which is exported. It's a huge marketplace, growing at 15% per annum through 2025. Penetration is about 1/10 of that of the United States. And this company has about 20% market share, taking shares from other companies in the space. So it's a consolidator along with its competitor, AK Medical, who each have about 20% of the marketplace. The barriers to entry in this business are very high due to physician training, brand recognition. Management is strong, and it's a family-owned company with 63%, yet it's publicly listed. We think this company can grow 30% per annum for the next several years. We build financial models typically on all our companies that are 1 megabyte in size. Market cap's only $2 billion in this company, so it's a long way to go before it becomes the size of US Surgical, and the marketplace is very, very underpenetrated. So free cash flow generation is good. It's net cash. company we think is just going to be set to grow. It could be a 2, 3, 4-bagger in the next 3 years quite easily. I'm going to stop here. There's a lot of other companies that we have actually on our presentation, which you should feel free to look at. But I'll take some questions from here. And Kevin, thank you very much for having us.
Yeah, Ken, thanks so much for the presentation. And I just wanted to follow up. One of the things I wanted to tie in, because you didn't have a chance to talk much about some of your healthcare exposure, except for the one company. What are you seeing in general around healthcare trends in China in particular, and the growth prospects, and even stock valuations, as compared to the US and the healthcare arena?
Well, certainly. Thanks very much for the question. The healthcare space in China is very exciting right now. It's an evolving space where 14 years ago in 2006, only less than half, about 45% of the population had medical coverage. Today, 90% of the country has full medical coverage. Which means that there's more money to go around for procedures and processes. In the past, also the medical system was very poorly run by state-run hospitals. And so getting access was a problem. So this new growth rate, I think Jason was talking about telemedicine, is a huge trend that's going on in China. $30 billion market. There's multiple companies that are already listed in China, one of which is called Ping An Healthcare, another one called Good Doctor, JD Health, Baidu. All the big internet companies are involved with healthcare. So just to give you some easy metrics to take away with, JD Health in the past fielded about 10,000 calls per day on their telematics platform. Since COVID, it's gone to 150,000 calls per day. A doctor basically can see 30 patients per day live in a physical office, but online he can service 200 patients. A trip to the doctor would be very prohibitive, but going to talk to a doctor online will cost you basically $2 for a 15-minute consultation. So the distribution possibilities are incredible for doctors to reach out online versus being stuck working at a state-run hospital, being underpaid, and also gaining greater access to a huge market. So it's a $30 billion opportunity on telematics alone. So huge opportunities, I think, both in the drug space, in the data / telemedicine space, as well as in device companies like we own in Trinley. In terms of valuations, just one more thing. I think the valuations, as everybody knows, in the United States are extremely high in the public markets just because of the TINA principle. There is no alternative. There's so much capital that's being thrown into the market with the Fed printing money. But in China, the money printing press hasn't been as extensive, and the multiples and valuations actually are somewhat reasonable, especially given all the geopolitical problems that the US and China have been having right now. Irregardless, I think, fast forward next couple of years, China is going to have its world of companies and opportunities. US will have theirs, even if the barriers in technology and geopolitics goes the wrong way.
Right. Well, yeah, and thanks for expanding on that. And that touches on a question that we have here regarding US-China tensions and political systems diverging. What do you see as the risks and opportunities in where you invest in China?
Yeah, well, clearly, the noise is extensive. There's not a week that goes by that there's not a discussion about a China virus, the Wuhan virus, that China claims that the virus came from the US. I mean, it's really like a bunch of kids in a kindergarten just duking it out instead of just focusing on solving the problems, which is essentially getting a cure for COVID. But I think, past the noise, both economies are huge. There's a lot of opportunities everywhere around the world, but China is a very unique situation with about 1.6 billion people, 1.4 billion people, and an opportunity that is growing with a 10,000 per capita GDP that will grow independently. I think the politics can get in the way with chips and semiconductors, and that's going to hurt the technology space in China. But in terms of the healthcare space, I think we're good. So it's a safer place to play than if you're a cell phone maker in China today.
Okay, well, thank you. And that actually touches on another question that we had around what the reality is on the ground in China regarding, treatment of COVID and whether it's really been fully tamped down. We haven't been able to do that, for a variety of reasons in the US. And I think that's going to have to be a little bit of a broader discussion. And hopefully we can follow up with some of the people that stuck around for your presentation. And with that, I encourage everyone to continue. Write in any questions, email me, whatever you like. We'll be following up. And this is the beginning of a discussion, not the end of it. So I'd like to thank all of you for joining us here today. And our next webinar will be scheduled for September 3rd. More details will be announced shortly. We're actually still talking with different people to narrow in on what topics are most interesting to folks. So again, we're looking for input from all of you in the community. And that's important, especially since things are changing day to day. I certainly didn't expect some of the topics that have come up even weeks ago. So we look out for more information. We'll try to be in touch, and I'll follow up with some of you to contribute to the community in a variety of ways, including giving us information on your investment mandates or interests as we build a marketplace where we can share more information and make things more efficient for you. And plans are set for fall and rolling out some more information on that. We'll be doing more to focus on individual deals, and that'll be interesting as we've generally worked more with funds and LP investors. Increasingly, family offices and direct deals are a part of our community. So I hope to understand more about what you're looking for, and I'll follow up to chat soon. So enjoy your holiday in the meantime, and happy birthday to the US if you're here stateside. And I hope everyone can stay safe and sane. Thanks again. Bye now.